So now I'm going to show you a representative use case of how the Riffyn SDE is being used to solve some common challenges we see with our customers. So I'll be showing you a tablet formulation process. So I just want you to keep in mind that even though I'm showing you a drug formulation process, that this is just to illustrate how Riffyn works. We've solved similar challenges in a variety of spaces, including industrial biology, pharmaceuticals, specialty chemicals, and food science. But first, let me just orient you around this process that I'm going to be talking about. So this is the tablet formulation process. It consists of a dispense and blend step, a lubricate step, a compression step, and then after compression, samples can be sent for either film coating or analytics. And so now that I've introduced you to the process, let me just show you how this customer was recording their data prior to Riffyn. So what they were doing is they were first recording data about their dispense and blend step in a PDF batch record. So in this batch record, they were manually writing down what was the lot number, what was the actual amount of these ingredients used. And then once this blend output was created, they were sending it for compression. And so the compression step was generating time series data, which was being sent to an onboard database. We've just taken a snapshot of that so that we can show you the types of data that was being recorded. Then after that, the data were sent for analytics. Here we go, analytics. So analytics data was being recorded on an instrument, and so the instrument was creating instrument files, which were being stored on individual computers. And then in some cases, it was also being sent for film coding, which was again creating instrument files stored on lots of different computers amongst different people. And so what our customer was really trying to do was pull all this data together. They really wanted to understand, how do parameters recorded on my batch record, like lot numbers and amounts of my ingredients, how does this correlate with my analytics data, such as the hardness of my tablets? And they were really struggling with this because it was spread across lots of different people. You know, the PDFs weren't even mineable, so how would they even find this information to begin with? And, you know, how does this data connect to the analytics data? It just really was almost impossible for them to pull this data together. And so let me show you how we solved their problems using Riffyn. So as Jared already introduced, Riffyn is a process-centric system. So the first thing that we have any customer do is write down their process. And this is actually pretty intuitive for users. As a scientist myself, I can say that people usually know their process. They just don't have a great system for describing it or writing it down. But the first thing I did is just say, okay, this is what I do. So first I do a dispense and blend step. I'm going to take an API compound. I'm going to turn that into a blend output. The blender itself is going to get passed through this step. And then comes a lubricate step. My blend output step gets transformed into a lubricant output, which then moves to the compression step. The compression step is going to turn that into an uncoated core tablet, which can then either be passed to analytics or it can be passed to film coat or both. And so just by writing this down, we have given the user a structure that they can use to record their data. So what do I mean by that? All right, so I've shown you how the material flows across the steps. Now let me show you how the data can flow across the step as well. The data is going to flow because it is going to get associated with the materials on the step. So in other words, the data are always recorded in context. And so that happens through the use of properties. So I've already kind of alluded to inputs and outputs. Let me make this really clear. So the dispense and blend step has several inputs and outputs, and on these inputs are properties. And the properties you can think of as placeholders for data. So for example, the dispense and blend step has an operator input, an API compound input. For the API compound, there's a property called batch size, which is a placeholder for the user to record what the batch size is. There's a lot number, a unit formula, a dispense amount. Same thing for the next ingredient, a lot number, or a unit formula, dispense amount. On these properties, you can record target values, and then I'll also show you in the software where you can actually record the actual values used in addition to what the target value was. And so because these properties are recorded in context, always associated with the material, always associated with a step in a process, it means that the data can be automatically joined based on how the materials flow across the steps. So what this means in practice is that a user can enter their data into Riffyn, not think about how it relates to the data upstream and downstream, and because you've already told Riffyn how the material flows, it means that the data can be automatically joined in the background. So the operators can focus on recording and collecting their data, and Riffyn does all the work for them of contextualizing it and joining it automatically. And I will show you how it's actually done in a real-world example. So before I show you how the data are recorded and joined, let me just point out one other feature that we have in Riffyn, which is this procedural tasks on the right-hand side. So not only did I show you how material flows and how data flows, but we also have a human workflow that you can define as well. So you can define human tasks that are needed to perform an experiment, and you can attach pictures and videos to your procedural tasks as well to really add clarity to your experimental design. So what I've shown you up till now is just the process design, which itself is not where you record the data. This is a reusable template that is used as the blueprint for recording data, but it's not actually where you record your data. So let me show you that. Actually, let me do this first. Go back to this step. I want to orient you. So when you're in the process, I showed you inputs and outputs going down the page. So the inputs and the properties are going down the page. But then when you enter an experiment, which is where actual experimental data is entered, now you'll see that the resources and their associated properties are going across the page. And that's because each step can have multiple runs. So run is an instance of a step. So in this example, in their dispense and blend step, they were looking at 3 different concentrations of pre-gelatinized starch, so 1%, 2%, and 3%. And I'm just going to walk you through this experimental design. So they were doing a DOE. So let me just click on this one, and I'll show you how the data are connected across the steps. So they were screening 3 different percentages of pre-gelatinized starch. For each percentage of pre-gelatinized starch, there are 3 percentages of magnesium stearate they were screening. So you can see that each of these is connected to 3 downstream steps. Then if we look at the lubricate step, next to the compression step, you can see that for each combination of pre-gelatinized starch and magnesium stearate, they were looking at 2 different diameters of tablets. So you can just go down the page and see how these data are connected. So now that I've shown you the setup of the experiment, I want to show you how you can get data into Riffyn. There are lots of different ways to get data into Riffyn and different types of data you can enter into Riffyn. So you'll notice here that there's some data that's in bold and some data that are not in bold. So the data that are in bold, these are the resources. And so what I mean by resource, this is the material that I was talking about. So this is the input. So here, this is an API compound that was generated in a previous step. And so the question is, how do I get samples that were generated in a previous step? How can I assign them to this experiment? So I'm going to show you that this is being done by barcoding. So I'm just going to create 3 fake runs here. So I just created 3 new runs. And I'm going to show you how I assign resources from a previous experiment using a barcode scanner. It appears that my barcode scanner is no longer attached to my computer, which would probably be the prerequisite for getting the barcode scanner to work. So I apologize for that user error. Let me do this instead. So let's copy the resource name here and just fill it in there. And so what you'll see there is that, pretend that I use a barcode scanner because that's what I usually do. And so what you'll see here is that there are different sets of properties. So the lot number, the creation date, and the project ID, this is really metadata or fixed property data that is associated with that input. So it was something that was defined when that sample was created. And the way Riffyn works is that we really try to create it such that you do not have to enter data more than once. So the lot number, the creation date, and the project ID always live with that entity in the system. And then whenever you assign it, it's just going to show up. You don't need to go hunting around for batch records to try to figure out what was the creation date or the lot number. It just lives with that entity in the system. And then you'll see that there are other properties such as batch size, unit formula, and dispense that are specific to this experiment. And so now I have the opportunity to type in those values here. So you'll see that this 330 is the target amount, and this 340 that I typed in, I'll just use this 350 for example. So you can see that I'm keeping track of the actual amount used and the planned amount. And so I've just shown you how to do manual data entry, but there are 3 additional ways to do data entry into the system. So you can do a database query, you can do a file upload, or you can use our API to connect with instruments and programmatically push data in. So I'm going to show you in a second how to do database, data entry from a database and how to do data entry from a file upload. But for right now, I want to show you one other really cool feature about Riffyn. So let's say that you're in the middle of this experiment and you realize that you want to start recording additional data. So I know from a scientist point of view that this often happens to me that, I think I'm going to record a subset of data, and then when I get into the lab, I decide, oh, you know what, I really need to record something else. So if I were recording this into a LIMS system, that would be problematic because the data structure would be set and there would be no way for me to add additional parameters. But what I love about Riffyn is I can just come here and say, okay, I was recording time and speed in the blender, but you know what, I think I really want to also record temperature. So let's do that. So I'm just going to add this temperature property. I need to choose a unit here. Okay, so now I just come back to my data entry interface. I'm just going to scroll over to the blender. And you'll notice that before there was not a column for temperature, but now there is a column for temperature. So now I can just come here and start recording the temperature. Okay, so now that you've seen how to do manual data entry, let me now show you how we handle data entry from databases and also data entry via file upload. So I'm going to just skip ahead to the compression step. Now, I just want to remind you that the compression data was being stored in a database, and so it was time series data, right? For each of the runs, there would be a time series data set that's being stored on a database. So this is no problem. So here's the placeholders here for that time series data. In Riffyn, we can just connect to that database. Here we go. I am connecting to the database right now. Okay, and now what happened is I entered Parsley, which is our system for mapping columns in the database to properties in Riffyn. So I'm just going through this to show you how it works. You would not need to do this. You set this up once, and then you can just simply click Apply every other time. But basically, we've just taken columns from the spreadsheet and mapped them to properties in Riffyn, and then I'm just going to click Upload. Okay, and now you'll see that the data that were in that database are now in Riffyn. So see, here's that time series data associated with the first run. I'm just going to click on the next run. And I'll see time series data associated with the next run. Here's time series data associated with the third run, et cetera. And so now we've got really multi-valued data in Riffyn. And keep in mind that it's being joined all the way downstream to the dispense and blend data that I recorded on the first step. Okay, I'm now going to show you how you can upload data from a file. So here we're on that analytics step. And there are placeholders, again, for the data that is being set up by the instrument, mass, thickness, diameter, hardness. So all I need to do here is come and find that file. This is that exact file that I showed you at the beginning, and it's an Excel file. Okay, and once again, we use the same Parsley interface. In this case, you can actually see the data block where the data are being pulled from. We can handle lots of different types of data. We can handle standard, transposed tables, key value pairs, matrix data. We can handle mixed. So if your instrument file has a mixture of tables, key value pairs, matrices, we can handle all of that. So Riffyn will automatically find it and assign the headers. And then again, you do this mapping once from the from the column in your spreadsheet to the property in Riffyn, and then I never have to think about this again. My operators just come in here, they find the file, they upload, and then you'll see that that data that was in the file is now in my Riffyn experiment. And so what I think is really cool about this is that you get real-time feedback in your experiment. So let's say that I see that maybe this thickness is a little bit lower than what I was expecting. So I can just go and start exploring the data. So I'm just going to step back in time and say, okay, what could be causing that? Let me look at that compression data. Okay, yeah, it was 25 diameter tablets. Here was the operator. Oh yeah, with that tablet press, sometimes that gives me some interesting results. I can go all the way back to the dispense step and remind myself, what was the lot number of that API compound? What was the unit formula? Et cetera, et cetera. All the data are right there. But what I'd like to impress upon you is that even though I really like this flip screen way of looking at data, the UI is really not the power of Riffyn. The power comes from the fact that what you see as highlighted runs here is actually indicative of the fact that on the back end, all the data are getting automatically joined across all these steps. So all the metadata I showed you, all the procedural data, such as the blender speed, the blender temperature I decided to record on the fly, all that results data like the tablet hardness, my compression data, all of that is getting joined into a single comprehensive data table ready for immediate analysis. So once my data are in Riffyn, there's no more searching for, no more cleaning, organizing, aggregating, no more running down the hallway to try to find your friend and say, hey, where's that PDF batch record? No, it goes in Riffyn and it's immediately ready for analysis. And so in order to access this Riffyn generated data table, there's two ways to do it. So one is going to be via our API, which I'm not going to show you today. I'm just going to emphasize that we do have an API for getting data out of Riffyn. You can use that to stream that comprehensive data table directly to data repositories such as data lakes or stream to analysis pipelines where you can apply machine learning algorithms. Or you can do it right in the user interface, which is what I'm going to show you today. So the user can manually download that Riffyn generated data table. So all we do is we just come here and we say export data from this experiment. And there we go. So now that data table that was generated by Riffyn has all the data in it that was put in that experiment. So I'm taking the CSV file generated by Riffyn and I'm opening it in JUMP. But I want to emphasize that by no means can you only use JUMP for data analysis. You can use any program that takes a CSV file, which is basically every statistical program. Now we have a lot of customers using JUMP, so we have a lot of add-ins here. So I'm just going to clean this data table. There we go. I'm going to group by steps. Okay, so now you'll see over here you might recognize these step names. So dispense and blend, lubricate, compression, analytics, film coat. So you might notice that all the steps from the dispense and blend are here, and all the data from the dispense and blend are here. So like the API compound name, the dispense amount, all of these ingredients, they're all here. And then if we go down to the analytics, let's say let me just move this over so you can see this a little better. My diameter, hardness, mass, thickness, all that data is here in a single data table. And so the question is, what do you do with it? And the answer is you can do anything you want, which is the best part. What I really like about this is that all the data always comes out in the same structured data table. And so because it always has the same structure, you can write scripts against it to automate your analysis. And so what I like to do is I just attach them directly to the process. So here I attach that script and I'm just going to download it. There we go. So here's my analysis script that I downloaded and I can run that. Okay, so what I chose to do with all that data was to do a correlation analysis. And you saw that I did it in approximately 3 seconds. And what's cool is that I can do it with my data. Jared, if you were across the country from me, he could also run this exact same analysis with his data. So let me show you what the analysis is that I'm doing. So here I was really interested in the hardness of the tablets because that's my key outcome here. That's what I really care about. And I want to know what are the parameters in my process that are affecting that key outcome. So what I'm doing here is running a correlation analysis. So let me show you that I was looking at 4 different parameters. So there's API compound, which does only have 1 in this experiment, so that's a useless parameter to look at here. I'm also looking at the amount of pre-gelatinized starch in the recipe. I'm looking at the amount of magnesium stearate, and I'm looking at the tablet press diameter, so the diameter of the tablets. And what I want to understand is, are these things affecting the hardness of my tablets? So, which of these are causing variation in my process? And so here I start to see that there might be a trend with the pre-gelatinized starch. So I'm seeing that as you increase the amount of pre-gelatinized starch, the hardness increases, and the p-value is 0.01. So I'm feeling pretty good about this. But what you might have noticed is that I only downloaded data from a single experiment. So, this correlation is not that strong, but I'm starting to get a hint here. So you might start to think, well, it would be cool if I could look at more data. What if I could look at data across all of the experiments on the process? Would this trend still hold? So with Riffyn, we make that easy. So let me go back to the process. So, sorry, let me orient you here. So remember that here I was in the experiment. I came here and I said export data from this experiment. If instead I had come to the process design, I could have come over here and said export data from all the experiments. And what this is going to do is concatenate the data from all of the experiments on that process into a single data table. So let me do that for you. So there we go. In a single click, I now have that exact same data table that I generated before, except for it has data from all of the experiments on the process. Let me show you that. I'm going to group these by steps. So you're going to see that those same steps are there with all of the properties and all of the steps are still there. But if you look at this column, this is the experiment number. Before I was just looking at experiment 2, and now I'm looking at experiment 2, 3, 4, and 6, which are all the experiments that I have put on this demo process. But as you might imagine and appreciate, in a real life process, you might have hundreds or even thousands of experiments on a process. And so I can download all of them and look at them together, or I can download a subset of them if I don't want to look at all of them together. And what I can do now is I can run that exact same script. I'm actually just going to pull it up here in real time, and I'm going to run that script again. And so now I have very quickly gone from looking at a single experiment to looking at multiple experiments and using the same analysis. So now, again, I showed you that looking at the effective API compound in a single experiment was useless, but now I'm looking at multiple experiments, and I can see that the p-value here is 0.1, so not really a statistically significant trend there. But what's interesting is that when I look back at the pre-gelatinized starch, the effect of the amount of pre-gelatinized starch on the hardness of the tablets, now I'm really starting to see an exciting trend here that as you increase the amount of pre-gelatinized starch, you're definitely seeing an increase in the hardness of the tablets. You'll see that my confidence interval really tightened up, and my p-value is less than 0.0001. So now I'm feeling really confident that my pre-gelatinized starch is having an effect on the hardness of my tablets. And so now I've very quickly gone from data into the system to understanding what the properties are that are affecting my key value. And so now we can quickly iterate on the process and say, ooh, pre-gelatinized starch, pay attention to that, because we really got to control for that if we want to control for the hardness of our tablets. I'll just show you that there were a couple other properties that we looked at that did not have significant effects. And so what you can imagine is that from here, you'd iterate on this and say, all right, we know pre-gelatinized starch makes a difference. Now let's go back and look at the effect of other ingredients, because we know that they can have a significant effect on the hardness. Right here. Okay, so you might be thinking, okay, well, this is all well and good, but you're assuming that I know my process the moment I walk into the lab. So you're assuming that I know I'm going to go all the way from my dispense and blend step to my analytics. I'm going to measure the film coat data. What if I don't know that? I know from experience as a scientist that you don't always know your process when you step into the lab. And so that's okay. We handle that use case as well. So let's pretend that you've done this instead. So take a look at this and remember that I said after the compression step, it can either go to analytics or film coat. So what if you'd done this instead? What if you'd drawn this process flow diagram? Where you said, okay, I know I'm going to do dispense and blend, lubricate, compression, and then I'm going to throw those samples to analytics. And so you record data on that. And then let's say at a completely different date, you decide that you want to take the output from the compression step and you want to record film coat data on that. So now you've got data, related data, but living in two totally separate processes, recorded in two totally different times. And so what you really want to say, well, I really want to take this data and I want to join it with my film coat data, because I want to see if there's any correlation between the analytics of my tablets, the hardness, thickness, mass. I want to see if it's affecting the film coat. And so what do? So in Riffyn, we create a master process. So I've created the first part of this master process for us, just in the interest of time. So let me just open this up, and you'll recognize that those steps, dispense and blend, lubricate, compression, analytics, that those are all here. And so now what I want to do is link this to my film coat data. So that's easy. We just go here. I'm going to look for it. There it is. There's my film coat process. And so then I just click and I drag. So I say, okay, when the output of this process becomes the input to film coat, then join that data. And that's all I had to do. So now Riffyn knows that when the output of analytics becomes the input to film coat, I'm going to join. And so then you can download that data much in the same way that I did before. In the interest of time, I just already generated that Riffyn CSV, and I'm going to download it here. Okay, let me open that up. Okay, so now you'll recognize that this Riffyn generated CSV file you will recognize that I have dispense and blend, lubricate, compression, analytics, and now that data is also joined to the film coat data from those two different processes. And now I can also script analysis on this. I'm going to run that. Sorry, let me unselect this data. I'm going to run it again. Okay, so now what I wanted to understand was how do the tablet properties affect the efficiency of my film coat? So in the film coating, the efficiency measurement is the % tablet weight gain. And what I want to understand is how do my tablet properties such as diameter, hardness, mass, and thickness, how do these affect the efficiency of film coat? So I think you can just look and see that there's clearly a correlation here, where when I increase the hardness of the tablet, then my % weight gain goes down. And so I just want to emphasize how easy it was to pull this data together in Riffyn and how hard it would have been in the real world. Whereas when you had analytical data sitting with different people and different computers, and you had film coat data generated in a different time, it would be really hard to pull that together. But with Riffyn, you saw that I did it almost instantaneously, and then I found this correlation between hardness and film coat efficiency. So now the group knows that they need to pay attention to the hardness of their tablets because it's going to affect their film coat efficiency. And so in this way, they can just very quickly iterate on their process and really optimize it in a short amount of time.